Greetings, class. We're back to talk about conflict temperaments. In this section, we're going to be answering the question, what are conflict temperaments? And so it's not necessary to use jargon in most cases. I try to keep this pretty straightforward. Temperament is really just saying human nature. What for the context of this class, we're saying what's human nature? What's your nature? What's in your nature in terms of conflict? What are conflict temperaments? This is the dispositions you have for things like. We'll talk more about the specific styles, but if you're, it's in your nature to avoid conflict, right? I mean, like that's just kind of like, is that what you have the tendency towards? Is it in your nature to be competitive? Is it in your nature to be accommodating, to be compromising, to be collaborative? And knowing something about the way you are is really helpful in terms of making plans about what you're going to do when you interact with people in terms of conflict. If it's not in your nature to be confrontational, it would be bad advice for a stranger to say you should go, like tell that person what's up, get in their face. Because it's asking you to do something that you're not good at, right? Well, in the same way as a stranger's advice, you can think about being strategic and thoughtful about what are the things that you want to do in terms of advocating for yourself, problem solving, engaging in conflicts with others as well, and just being serious about it. So there's the test. There's a few of them. You can search for conflict types, and conflict temperament tests online if you haven't taken it already. But the idea here is that by answering questions that identify different features of the way that we naturally respond to different social settings and conflict situations, that we're able to kind of more pinpoint details. And some of this might be, I mean, we say human nature. This does not mean that it's innate, that you're born that way. This could be stuff that you've learned from how you've been socialized, the lessons from your culture, or your family, or just your experience. We absorb it in a lot of ways. So I'm not trying to say that this is ingrained. Like this is not about the nurture versus nature debate or something about where our behaviors come from. It's just more the reflection of what are our behaviors. So when we start with thinking about the temperaments that we have or the tendencies in these different areas, I tend to start with conflict avoidance. And that happens for a few different reasons. One is that I think that there's a number of different ways individuals learn that conflict is something to be avoided. But strategically, we should see over time that engaging in conflicts tends to not produce the kinds of outputs that we want. And as a result, conflicts seem like something like they're not worth it, right? You don't get a return on your investment. But thinking about this as a mechanism, if we think about conflict as addressing fundamentally two different details: the interests of the self and the interests of the other. When we operate with a low intensity towards our own personal interest, and with a low intensity towards the interests of the other, that's what produces conflict avoidance, right? It just does not become a matter that's important. We can avoid dealing with this one. When we have high reflection of the self, right, the interests of the self, and low reflection of the interests of the other, then we have competition, right? The more I win, the more you lose, right? I want it all for me. That's That's competition. And there's lots of times where being competitive is a good thing. Conversely, when we're high on the interests of the other and low on the interests of the self, we're accommodating, right? This is the example that I use for, like, if you want a second date, you'll probably be accommodating on your first date. If you have an opportunity to do something nice for your parents, and especially because you're thinking about like how much they've done for you, then you might forego what you want in order to provide for their needs, right? But the idea is that we don't care so much about ourselves in those moments, and we care significantly about the interests of the other. Compromise is the reflection of the sacrifice of some of the interests of the self in order to satisfy some of the interests of the other. Like, I give a little to give a little. I give up a little bit in order to give a little bit, right? And the desired goal there is that by compromising, that you'll encourage the other person to compromise as well. And then you find a solution that's maybe not optimal for both people individually, but it's mutually satisfying. And you get enough of what you wanted that you feel satisfied in the transaction. And then collaboration is high on the interests of the self and high on the interests of the other, right? It's the idea that I will work with another party in order to make sure that both of our needs are met. Not just on my needs and not just on the needs of the other person, but so that both of us can get what we want. And so the tests give you a sense of what your score in each of those areas would be. You might actually see that you have higher scores in multiple areas, or that you don't feel like you have a low score anywhere. You also might find that when you take the test, you start thinking about kind of fundamentally different social experiences when you're answering different questions. So one of the things that you can do is retake some of these conflict management tests, thinking about like at home versus at work versus, interactions with friends or something. And you might see that you have different temperaments for how you respond to conflict in different settings. And that's the more you know. Again, everything about the skills being examined in this class is supposed to come back to the whole point. The more you know about yourself, the more that can improve your ability to strategically think about how you engage with conflicts, when you engage with conflicts, and what's likely to produce the optimum results. Trying to strategize around a skill that you don't have, for example, is kind of like setting yourself up for failure. So part of the other thing that can happen here is that if you find that you're scoring lower in an area that you actually feel like that would be good for you to be better at, then you can work on those skills. The more you work on those skills, the more you might see that you're able to apply that. Right? We might have a desire to be collaborative, but lack of opportunity to do so. But it might also be the case that you would like to be more collaborative, you just don't know how to make it work, right? The more we increase our capacity to work with others, the more that's likely to be helpful in certain parts of our lives. But that doesn't mean it's something that we want to use in all parts of our lives. Another classical example is parents don't tend to operate on a collaborative model until their children are old enough to be held kind of to account on their own. Young children just simply don't have as much capacity. Asking them to do much more than sharing is probably asking too much. When that transition could take place, might be up to a parent. And the more kids somebody has, the more they might be able to see the tendencies and the skills manifest or something. But the point is, we can't expect more from ourselves or more from others, then they're likely to be in a position to be able to perform. And so trying to be collaborative because it's a personal goal may not always work, especially when we're dealing with people who may not have as much of a skill set in order to be able to do so. Or contextually, people can be more limited. But again, understanding these temperaments as our dispositions, whether or not it's completely biological or natural or socialization or culture or whatever it is, where it comes from is not as important as just understanding how that performs in your personal life, what you can do to improve it if you want to, how to use your traits, your skills, your expectations to better manage dynamics in relationships and conflicts. And we'll continue to talk more about, kind of those 5 modes when we examine other conflicts going forward.